The penthouse apartment was a testament to Elias Thorne's success, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan, Italian marble floors, and an atmosphere of curated, expensive silence. Elias, 42, impeccably dressed even after a grueling day of closing a multi-million-dollar real estate deal, was usually the last person to walk through the mahogany front door. Tonight, however, the deal had concluded unexpectedly early. He shrugged off his tailor-made coat, his movements practiced and efficient. Clara, his wife of 8 years, would be surprised. Usually, Elias called ahead, giving her time to prepare a late dinner or arrange one of her casual, elegant parties. Tonight, he craved only quiet, but as he stepped deeper into the apartment, the pervasive silence felt wrong. It wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the suffocating silence of suppression. A peculiar chill, unrelated to the air conditioning, settled on his shoulders. He felt a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the air, like a distant, contained struggle. "Clara," he called out, his voice echoing slightly against the high ceilings. No answer. He walked past the immaculate kitchen and the spacious living area, his leather shoes barely making a sound on the marble. Clara's mother, Eleanor, a frail woman of 78 who had moved in with them 2 years ago following a minor stroke, occupied a small, well-appointed guest suite at the end of the hall. Eleanor was often quiet, spending her days reading or watching nature documentaries, but tonight, the atmosphere around her room felt thick with an unwelcome energy. Elias approached the closed door of the guest suite. It was then he heard it, faint, muffled sounds. Not a cry, but something close to it, a desperate, whispered plea. "Please, Clara, just a little bit of water." The voice was Eleanor's, thin and shaky. It was immediately followed by a sharp, low hiss, a sound that made the hair on the back of Elias's neck stand up. "Shut up, mother. You'll wake him up. I told you, you had enough an hour ago. Now lie back down and stop making things difficult." It was Clara's voice. But it wasn't the honeyed, sophisticated tone she used in public or with him. This was a voice stripped bare, harsh, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a voice he had never heard before. Elias stopped dead, his hand hovering near the doorknob. His breath hitched in his chest. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, whose decisions moved fortunes, yet now he was paralyzed by the sounds coming from his own home. Water. Making things difficult. The truth, a vile, unexpected serpent, began to uncoil in his gut. Without allowing himself another second to rationalize, to doubt, or to hesitate, Elias Thorne grabbed the brass doorknob, twisted it sharply, and pushed the door open. The scene that greeted him was not a fight, but something far worse, a cold, calculated act of quiet cruelty. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp, illuminating the scene in stark, unforgiving detail. Eleanor was half-sitting, half-slumped against the pillows of her expensive, adjustable bed, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed on her daughter. Clara stood over her mother, not physically striking her, but using the far more insidious weapon of control. She was holding a small, silver tray, one hand resting heavily on the frail woman's chest, pinning her slightly to the mattress. The other hand was holding a mostly empty glass of water, which she was deliberately holding just out of Eleanor's reach. Clara was not dressed in her usual designer loungewear. She was wearing a loose cotton robe, and the carefully constructed mask of the elegant socialite had completely fallen away, revealing a face twisted by impatience and resentment. When the door swung open, Clara's head snapped toward the entrance. The shock on her face was immediate and absolute, quickly replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. Her hand slipped from Eleanor's chest. "Elias," she gasped, the glass of water clattering onto the bedside table, splashing a small pool onto the mahogany. Her voice was too high, too sharp. What are you doing home?" "The deal." Elias didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, a towering figure framed by the doorway, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Clara visibly flinch. He wasn't seeing his wife, he was seeing a stranger inflicting deliberate, petty torture on a vulnerable old woman. Eleanor, seeing Elias, let out a shaky, relieved sob. Elias, dear boy, she whispered, her voice cracking. Elias's gaze finally shifted to Eleanor. He saw the faint, red impression on her dressing gown where Clara's hand had been pressing down. He saw the dry lips and the pleading in her eyes. The urge to rush forward, to comfort Eleanor. Warred with the overwhelming need to understand the betrayal in front of him, he took a slow step into the room, his eyes never leaving Clara's. His voice, when it finally came, was dangerously low, stripped of all its usual corporate smoothness. It was the voice of judgment. What, Elias asked, the single word hanging heavy in the air, was that, Clara? Clara tried to recover, trying to smooth the panic from her face, attempting to rebuild the facade. Oh, darling, it's nothing. Eleanor was having one of her episodes. She gets disoriented and thinks she hasn't had any water. I was just calming her down, trying to remind her of the doctor's liquid restrictions. She can be so difficult. She gave a nervous, forced laugh. Difficult? Elias repeated, his eyes flickering toward the spilled water. You were pinning her, Clara. And holding the glass just out of her reach. Is that your method for calming her down? His calmness was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. Clara stammered, her gaze darting everywhere but his eyes. I wasn't pinning her. I was helping her sit up. She was getting restless, Elias. You don't understand. She does this all the time when you're gone. She's manipulative. Elias felt a cold certainty settle in his heart. It was a truth so bitter it almost made him physically ill. This was not a one-time slip-up. This was a pattern that he strode past Clara, his shoulder brushing hers, a deliberate, dismissive gesture. He picked up the glass, went into the attached private bathroom, filled it with water, and returned to the bedside. He gently helped Eleanor sit up further and held the glass to her lips. Eleanor drank greedily, the small act a testament to her genuine thirst. As she drank, her eyes, filled with years of pain and silence, met Elias's. In that brief, silent exchange, Elias understood everything. Elias gently lowered Eleanor's head back onto the pillow after she finished the water, his hand lingering on her shoulder in a reassuring grip. Rest now, Eleanor, he said softly, his voice a balm against the tension in the room. You are safe. I'm right here. Eleanor, still visibly shaking, managed a weak nod and closed her eyes. Her immediate distress eased, replaced by a fragile exhaustion. Elias straightened up, turning slowly to face his wife. Clara was still near the bedside table, nervously smoothing the front of her robe, her eyes darting between Elias and the door. She was desperate to escape the judgment radiating from him. Out, Elias commanded, a low, guttural sound that sliced through the expensive silence. Now. We will discuss this somewhere else. Clara hesitated, gathering a sliver of her usual arrogance. Discuss what, Elias? I told you, I said out, Clara, Elias repeated, taking a step toward her. His eyes, usually cool and calculating, were now arctic cold. He didn't need to shout. The sheer force of his presence, the millionaire magnate in full battle mode, was enough. Defeated, Clara stumbled out of the room. Elias followed, pausing only to shut Eleanor's door with a soft click, a final gesture of protection that he led Clara not to the lavish living room, but to his private study, a fortress of dark wood and leather, designed for absolute control. He closed the heavy door and did not sit, instead leaning against the massive mahogany desk, placing himself physically above her. Sit, he ordered, pointing to a single, uncomfortable-looking guest chair. Clara, swallowing hard, obeyed. Elias looked at her, and the distance in his gaze was infinite. 8 years, Clara. 8 years, I thought I knew you. Tell me, when did the mask slip? Was it always this way? Clara crossed her arms, trying to reclaim some dignity. This is ridiculous, Elias. You walk in on one little misunderstanding. Elias cut her off, his voice rising a notch. You were denying water to your own sick mother. You pinned her to the bed and treated her like a nuisance. Don't insult my intelligence with lies, Clara. The look on your face, the terror on hers, that was not a single incident. That was habit. His accusation hit its mark. Clara's perfect composure shattered, replaced by raw, ugly frustration. Fine. Yes, it's a habit, she spat out, suddenly abandoning the denial. Because she is a burden, Elias. A suffocating, manipulative burden. She's always complaining, always needy, always ruining the aesthetic of our perfect life. I hate her presence here. Elias's jaw tightened. The anger was overwhelming, but beneath it was a devastating realization: this cruelty was born of deep, festering malice, not momentary stress. And you thought it was acceptable to abuse her because I wasn't here to see it? Elias's voice was barely a whisper now, more dangerous than a roar. You risked everything we have, our reputation, my love, the entire facade, for what? To save yourself the bother of being kind? Clara leaned forward, her eyes pleading but still calculating. It's not about kindness, Elias. It's about us. It's about the stress she puts on me. And you know why she's here, don't you? Because of the money. You insisted she live here so we could deduct the medical expenses and use her assets for tax purposes. She is a financial liability, and I am managing the problem. The word money hit Elias like a physical blow, not because of the assets, but because it exposed the chilling core of their relationship. He suddenly saw his entire marriage through a new lens, a cold, transactional arrangement. Elias pushed off the desk, walking toward the window, his back to her. You have just signed the death warrant of our marriage, Clara, he said, staring out at the city lights. I don't care about the tax breaks. I care about human dignity. And you have none. He turned back, his expression resolute. You will not go near Eleanor again. You will not speak to her. You will not even breathe the same air. Tomorrow morning, before dawn, you will leave this apartment. I will have the papers drawn up by lunchtime. And then, we will discover exactly what other secrets you've been keeping. The confrontation was over. The millionaire had made his first, ruthless decision. Clara Thorne's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and a sudden, sharp fear. You can't be serious, Elias. Leave. Now. You're throwing away 8 years, everything we built, because of my mother's hysterics and a glass of water. Elias remained impassive, his stance unwavering. It was not a glass of water, Clara. It was a clear demonstration of your character, or lack thereof. And no, I'm not throwing away 8 years. I am accepting that 8 years were wasted on a lie. You have 20 minutes to pack a single suitcase of essentials. A driver will take you to a hotel I've already arranged downtown. My security team will escort you. He picked up his phone and made 2 quick, quiet calls, one to his personal security chief, Marcus, and another to his chief legal counsel, a famously sharp divorce attorney named David Chen. The calls were brief, factual, and left no room for negotiation. David will be filing an emergency protective order first thing tomorrow morning, Elias informed Clara, his voice flat. Until the separation is finalized, you will have no access to the apartment, Eleanor, or any joint accounts. Every dollar, every property, will be accounted for. You can speak only through your lawyer. The mention of the legal shark David Chen finally broke Clara's arrogance. Her fear intensified. Elias, please. Don't do this. I was stressed. I was taking care of her all day. I deserve a break, some recognition. I'm sorry. I'll never touch her again, I swear. She tried to move toward him, to grasp his arm, to use the manipulative charm that had been part of their relationship's foundation. Elias held up a hand, stopping her advance. Don't touch me, Clara. Your apology rings hollow. It's not remorse I hear, it's the sound of someone realizing they've jeopardized their income stream. He stepped out of the study and went straight to Eleanor's room. He knocked softly, then slipped inside. Eleanor was awake, her eyes wide, still processing the sudden storm. "Eleanor," Elias said, sitting beside her. He took her frail hand in his. "I am sorry for everything you have endured. I was blind, and I failed to protect you. I am fixing it now. Clara is leaving tonight. Permanently. You are safe here." A single tear tracked down Eleanor's cheek. I was so afraid she would tell you I was lying," she whispered, her grip on his hand surprisingly strong. "She made me feel like I was going crazy, Elias. She told everyone I was a burden." "She was wrong," Elias affirmed fiercely. "You are not a burden. You are family. In fact, I am hiring a highly recommended live-in nurse, starting tomorrow morning, to ensure you have professional, dedicated care 24 hours a day. Until then, I will be sleeping on the sofa right outside your door." The genuine care in his eyes, the immediate action, and the promise of protection finally allowed Eleanor to release the years of silent torment. She squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Elias. Thank you." When Elias emerged from the room, Marcus, the security chief, was already waiting by the elevator, a silent, imposing figure. Clara was standing by the front door, a sleek, black suitcase beside her. Her face was pale with a mixture of hatred and defeat. She had packed, but she hadn't surrendered. "You'll regret this, Elias," she hissed as Marcus approached her. "You think you know everything, but you don't. This isn't just about Eleanor. You haven't seen the real damage yet." Elias merely tilted his head, a cold, predatory gleam in his eyes. "Try me, Clara. After what I've seen tonight, I welcome the honesty. And I assure you, your real damage will be met with a real, comprehensive financial counterattack." He watched impassively as Marcus escorted his now ex-wife out of the penthouse. The heavy door closed, and the silence returned, but this time, it was the silence of a battlefield after the first decisive victory. Elias knew the war had just begun, but he had secured the most vital asset, Eleanor. Elias sat in his study, the heavy door now a barrier against the past. Across the desk from him was David Chen, his lawyer, a man whose reputation was built on ruthlessly protecting his clients' wealth and interests. David was reviewing the preliminary findings of the security sweep and the initial review of the Thorne family finances. "Clara's lawyer has already contacted us, Elias," David stated, his voice calm and precise. "She's claiming emotional distress, demanding immediate access to the joint assets, and threatening to go public with allegations of your controlling behavior and unreasonable expulsion." Elias didn't flinch. "Standard tactics. We have an eyewitness, her mother, and a clear pattern of abuse, which is a strong counterlever. But my concern isn't the divorce settlement yet. I need to understand her motive beyond petty resentment. Her reaction last night, the mention of managing a financial liability and real damage, felt scripted." David nodded, tapping his pen on a file. "That's what I focused on overnight. We've looked into 3 areas: Eleanor's finances, Clara's personal spending, and any suspicious transfers. The financial trail, first, Eleanor's assets," David continued. "As you know, you manage them, but we gave Clara administrative access to pay Eleanor specific medical and personal expenses. The funds are substantial, a trust established by her late father." "And?" Elias prompted, his gaze sharp. "In the last 6 months, there's been a series of smaller, consistent withdrawals that don't match any reported medical expenses or known purchases. We're talking about approximately $80,000 in cash withdrawals, usually via ATM and always capped just below the federal reporting threshold." Elias leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. $80,000. For what? We don't know yet. But it leads to the second point, Clara's personal spending. Her expenditures have been exorbitant, even by your standards. We've uncovered a hidden credit card, a secondary account that she opened 3 years ago, registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It's not on any joint financial disclosure. The air in the room grew heavy. This was beyond cruelty, this was calculated deception. The balance on that card? Elias asked, his voice flat. Currently $450,000, Elias. Mostly spent on high-end jewelry, art consultancy, and, most intriguingly, private travel services that don't align with her social calendar, David revealed. It seems she's been liquidating funds from Eleanor's administered account and then routing money from elsewhere to keep this second life funded. The hidden life. Elias's mind raced. $450,000 in hidden debt, $80,000 in untraceable cash. The financial abuse of Eleanor was merely a side benefit to a much larger, darker operation. David, I need full documentation on that private travel service and the art consultant. Immediately. This goes beyond a messy divorce, this smells like extortion or an external relationship that required discretion and cash. Agreed, David confirmed. I've already alerted a private investigative firm. They're starting on the travel logs and the consultant's records today. They'll also monitor Clara's movements at the hotel. Elias finally stood, walking to the window. The city looked indifferent to the betrayal unfolding in his life. He wasn't just losing a wife, he was confronting a criminal enterprise operating right under his nose. The truth was far more venomous than simple malice toward her mother. She said I hadn't seen the real damage yet, Elias murmured, more to himself than to David. Clara was terrified last night, not just of losing the marriage, but of losing the secret. The abuse of Eleanor was a clue, David. The real damage is financial, and it leads somewhere. We will find where it leads, Elias, David promised, gathering his files. I suggest you take a moment for yourself. We have initiated the PO and the 24-hour nurse, Sarah, is downstairs and ready to start. Eleanor is safe. Elias looked back at the cold, hard facts laid out on his desk. His empire was built on knowing the value of every asset. Now, he needed to know the true cost of his marriage. The morning light filtering into the penthouse brought with it a sense of professional calm in the form of Sarah Jenkins. A highly experienced registered nurse specializing in geriatric care, Sarah was mid-40s, with a reassuringly firm demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. Elias had introduced her to Eleanor briefly before retreating to his study to manage the legal fallout. Sarah began her assessment immediately. She was methodical, checking Eleanor's vital signs, reviewing her medication list, and noting her general physical condition. The first hour alone was enough to raise significant red flags. Mr. Thorne, Sarah said quietly, finding Elias in his study an hour later. Her tone was serious, professional, but laced with concern. Elias immediately put his legal files aside. What is it, Sarah? Is Eleanor stable? She is stable, but not well, Elias, Sarah corrected, using his first name with a confident familiarity that implied serious business. I have found clear signs of consistent neglect and deliberate discomfort. She is moderately dehydrated, despite her claims that Clara adhered to fluid restrictions. Her skin is dry, and her urine output suggests chronic insufficient intake. Elias felt a fresh wave of cold fury. She was actively denying her water last night. It was deliberate. It goes deeper, Sarah continued, crossing her arms. I also checked her blood pressure medication. Her doctor prescribed it for once a day, in the morning. However, Eleanor's last doses seem to have been administered erratically, sometimes missing entire days. She also has a mild, recurring pressure rash on her lower back, the kind that forms when a patient is left in the same position for extended periods, or when they are resisting movement to the bathroom because of restricted access. Eleanor hadn't just been deprived of water, she had been systematically debilitated and humiliated. Clara was trying to make her mother's life a constant, painful struggle. The emotional trauma is also evident, Sarah added softly. She is withdrawn and displays learned helplessness. When I offered her a full glass of water just now, she actually asked permission to drink it, looking toward the door as if expecting punishment. Elias rubbed the bridge of his nose, the financial crimes momentarily fading against this horrifying portrait of domestic tyranny. This is evidence, Sarah. Every detail. Please keep a meticulous record of everything, her intake, her output, any physical changes, and her mental state. This will all be presented to the court. The pattern of isolation over the next few days, as Sarah began to rebuild Eleanor's health and trust, more of Clara's patterns emerged. Eleanor, slowly feeling safe under Sarah's vigilant care, began to talk. She revealed that Clara would confiscate her phone and remote control during the day, isolating her and cutting off her communication with the outside world. Food portions were often reduced and controlled, not for medical reasons, but as punishment for being too loud or too needy. She would always wait until the cleaning crew left, or until she knew you were on a long conference call. Elias, Eleanor recounted one afternoon, her voice still weak but steadier. She was very careful. She told me if I ever told you, she would have me sent to a cheap, horrible facility where no one would visit. The realization dawned on Elias: the abuse wasn't just about resentment, it was about leverage. Clara needed Eleanor alive, but miserable, and under her total control to continue siphoning funds from the administered account and to maintain her elaborate, secret lifestyle. The cruelty was a control mechanism to enforce silence and compliance. Elias had his evidence of physical and emotional abuse, documented by a medical professional. Combined with the financial records David Chen was compiling, they now had a devastating, two-pronged legal attack against Clara. David Chen called Elias later that evening, his tone grim. "We have the data from the travel services, Elias. The private travel was all to Geneva, Switzerland. There were 4 trips in the last year. And the art consultant? He's a man named Julian Vance, a minor art dealer with an expensive lifestyle. He lives in Geneva." Elias looked out at the glittering city lights, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with chilling clarity. Financial drain, secretive trips, hidden debt, and a European contact. Clara wasn't just funding a shopping habit, Elias concluded. She was funding a relationship, potentially an escape plan, or possibly a partner in something far more serious. The battle for his assets was now a race to uncover the true nature of Clara's secret life before she could liquidate her remaining gains and disappear with Julian Vance. Elias Thorne was no stranger to high-stakes games, but this was personal. He was not negotiating a merger, he was dismantling a meticulously constructed 8-year lie. He called the head of the private investigative firm, a former intelligence operative named Liam O'Connell, and gave him a singular, immediate mandate: Geneva. "I want everything, Liam," Elias instructed over the secure line, pacing his study. Background: financial history, associates, and the exact nature of his relationship with Clara Thorne. Focus on Julian Vance, the art dealer. Within 24 hours, Liam's team had generated an initial profile of Vance. Julian Vance was 50, charming, and notoriously unsuccessful. He ran a small, struggling gallery specializing in emerging European masters, a polite term for artists who never quite made it. His lifestyle, however, contradicted his business's meager returns. He maintained a luxurious apartment overlooking Lake Geneva and drove a vintage Aston Martin. "He's been living well beyond his declared income for at least 3 years, Elias," Liam reported. "His primary source of funding is opaque, mostly large, personal transfers labeled as consultancy fees from various offshore accounts. We are tracking those accounts now, but I can almost guarantee they loop back to your financial ecosystem." The art of deception. Elias reviewed the photographs of Julian Vance, a slick, silver-haired man with a confident, slightly predatory smile. The type Clara gravitated toward, expensive, superficial, and easily controlled by money. "When did the transfers start?" Elias asked. "Roughly 3 years ago, coinciding with the opening of Clara's hidden credit card and shortly after Eleanor moved into the penthouse," Liam confirmed. "The abuse and the financial drain are intrinsically linked, Elias. Clara wasn't just in a relationship, she was funding a partnership. Elias realized the chilling truth. Clara had brought Eleanor into their home not out of familial obligation, but because having administrative control over Eleanor's substantial trust fund offered an easy, untraceable source of cash flow to sustain her lover and her secret life. Eleanor's suffering was the collateral damage of a financial scheme. Check Vance's recent inventory, Elias ordered. Specifically, look for any high-value art pieces that were suddenly purchased or appraised by Clara. I suspect they might be liquidating assets through the gallery to create a clean, untraceable nest egg in Europe. Liam's team immediately flagged a suspicious transaction from 6 weeks prior. A rare, minor 19th-century sculpture, supposedly valued at $750,000, had been purchased by an anonymous collector through Julian Vance's gallery. The transaction looked legitimate on paper, but the timing was too perfect. That sculpture, Elias muttered, recognizing the description. It was a wedding gift to us from an associate in Florence. It's sitting in the secondary living room right now. It was never sold. Exactly, Liam stated grimly. They're running a phantom sale. Clara likely forged the paperwork, claiming she shipped the sculpture to Geneva for sale, while in reality, she pocketed the $750,000 proceeds from Vance's account, which was likely funded by your money or Eleanor's. The sculpture remains here, and they've laundered the cash. Escalation and the final move, the discovery of the phantom sale, proved the criminal intent. Clara was not just spending money, she was actively committing seven-figure fraud against the marital estate, planning her exit, and using her mother as a pawn. Elias called David Chen, the lawyer. David, we have a $750,000 charge of fraud and theft, international money laundering, and clear documentation of elder abuse. We are shifting from divorce proceedings to criminal litigation and asset recovery. I want freezing orders placed on all assets linked to Julian Vance and Clara Thorne in Switzerland, the Caymans, and anywhere else Liam can trace them. Elias stood up, the weariness of the past few days forgotten, replaced by an icy, focused resolve. The millionaire who had been paralyzed by shock was now fully mobilized. Clara thought she had secured her escape, but she had only succeeded in cornering a predator in his own territory. Clara's game is over, Elias declared. We go to Geneva. 48 hours after the expulsion, Elias Thorne's private jet touched down at Geneva Cointrin Airport. He wasn't there to admire the jet though, he was there to dismantle a criminal conspiracy. With him was Liam O'Connell, the investigator, and a tight-knit team of legal and security consultants. Their first stop was a discreet location overlooking Julian Vance's exclusive apartment building. Liam's surveillance team was already in place, documenting Vance's movements. He's agitated, Elias, Liam reported, showing Elias a live feed. He's been making frantic calls all morning. The asset freeze hit his main operating account, the one receiving those consultancy fees, yesterday. His entire liquidity has evaporated. Elias smiled, a cold, humorless expression. Good. Starve the snake, and it will strike blindly. Clara must be equally panicked. They likely intended to meet here, complete the final transfer of the laundered money, and disappear before the divorce papers were served. Elias's plan was simple, turn Julian Vance against Clara, setting the trap. Elias used his influence in the global financial sector. He made a high-profile, yet completely bogus, appointment with a major Geneva bank, ensuring the news of his presence, the powerful, betrayed American millionaire, would filter rapidly through the city's tight financial circles. The pressure worked instantly. Julian Vance, realizing his financial fortress was crumbling and fearing his anonymous partner was suddenly exposed, requested an urgent, highly confidential meeting with Mr. Thorne's representative. Elias, flanked by Liam, chose to receive Vance in a high-end, neutral hotel conference room, placing Vance immediately on unfamiliar, nervous ground. Julian Vance, despite his polished appearance, entered the room sweating slightly, his charm replaced by fear. Mr. Thorne, I assure you, I am unaware of any wrongdoing concerning your divorce or your wife's personal affairs. My gallery operations are strictly above board. Elias didn't offer a handshake or a seat. He simply stared, letting his immense wealth and power fill the room. "Save the performance, Mr. Vance. I have copies of the forged appraisal for the 19th century sculpture currently sitting in my New York penthouse. I also have the bank records showing the $750,000 transfer from your account, money you accepted knowing the asset was never delivered to Geneva." Vance's veneer cracked. His eyes darted nervously to Liam. "It was just a favor. Clara said she needed to temporarily adjust some assets for tax purposes. She promised to send the sculpture later." "Lies," Elias stated flatly. "Clara is gone. She's been expelled from my home, and the fraud case against her, and anyone who aided her, is already active. You are now looking at charges of international money laundering and grand larceny. Your life, your reputation, your little gallery, they are all about to disappear." The crucial revelation. Vance slumped. The threat was real, delivered by a man with the resources to execute it globally. "What do you want?" Vance whispered, defeated. "The truth, Julian," Elias said, leaning in. "Clara didn't tell me about the real damage yet. You know what it is. I need the final piece of the puzzle. Where is the laundered money, and what was her ultimate plan?" Julian confessed everything. "The money is in a bearer bond vault, a safety deposit box in Liechtenstein. She was planning to meet me here this week, finalize the bond transfer to us both, and then we were going to disappear to Argentina. But the real damage, she told me it wasn't the $750,000. It was the life insurance policy." Elias froze. "What life insurance policy?" "Her mother's, Eleanor's," Vance stammered. Clara admitted she had changed the beneficiary 3 years ago, diverting it from a family trust to a personal, joint account with me. It's worth $3 million. She said she had to make sure the policy paid out quickly, but that she could never let you see the final documents, which is why she needed to control her mother's care, and silence her." The revelation of the life insurance, coupled with Clara's systematic abuse and restriction of Eleanor's medication, painted a terrifying picture. Clara wasn't just planning fraud, she was planning filicide disguised as natural causes. Elias finally sat down, gripping the edge of the table. The image of Clara denying Eleanor water, controlling her medication, took on a terrifying, homicidal clarity. His initial shock was nothing compared to the cold horror that now washed over him. Julian Vance's confession turned the air in the elegant Geneva hotel suite into a freezing mausoleum. Elias, sinking into his chair, felt a horror that eclipsed all his previous anger and exhaustion. This was not a simple case of betrayal or greed, this was a cold, calculated attempt at murder against his mother-in-law for a $3 million life insurance policy. Elias immediately called David Chen, disregarding the time difference. He went straight to the point. "David, you need to upgrade the charges immediately. Financial fraud, aggravated elder abuse, and now, attempted murder," he stated, fighting to keep his voice level. David Chen, at the other end of the line, betrayed no surprise. "What is your evidence, Elias? Intent alone isn't enough. The evidence is the policy change in Julian Vance's testimony. Clara was restricting Eleanor's medication and fluid intake to expedite the payoff. Sarah's, the nurse, report already confirms Eleanor's health was deliberately compromised. Vance claims Clara quietly diverted the insurance beneficiary 3 years ago to a joint personal account with him. The policy payout required Eleanor's death." David Chen's voice turned grave. "We must find the original policy document. That is the smoking gun for intent." Press Vance. "Where is the document?" Tracing the insurance document, Julian Vance was utterly cornered. His liquidity was gone, his escape plan was ruined, and he faced international fraud charges. His only chance for survival was full cooperation. In New York, Vance whispered. Clara used a small, rarely visited safe deposit box she inherited from her grandmother in a downtown Manhattan bank in the financial district. It's so insignificant it probably isn't even listed on the joint asset inventory. The document is there. Elias relayed the instructions to David Chen, an emergency search warrant. They needed immediate seizure of the box's contents. The warrant's justification would be evidence relating to a life-threatening crime against Eleanor Thorne. Simultaneously, Elias's team in Geneva swiftly moved on the Liechtenstein-bearer bond vault. With sufficient legal pressure and evidence of fraud, the cash out of the bond was blocked, and the $1.2 million worth of bonds inside the vault was frozen. Clara and Vance's entire escape fund had been neutralized. Clara's last gambit. Clara, confined to her hotel, was alarmed by the news from her lawyer. First, she learned Vance's accounts were frozen, confirming her lover had been compromised. Then came the news of the search warrant targeting the grandmother's insignificant bank safe deposit box. The targeting of that specific, secret box revealed the depth of Elias's investigation. Desperate, Clara sent Elias an encrypted message to his private cell phone: "You can't do this. If you hurt me, I'll bring you down too. That wasn't my only secret. You have skeletons in your closet, Elias. Remember, I covered for you for years." Elias read the message. It was not a plea for compromise, but a final threat. Clara was ready to expose the darker, hidden aspects of Elias's own business dealings if he pursued the criminal charges. Elias smiled. The threat showed him how terrified Clara truly was. But Elias couldn't stop now. After learning his wife was a calculated monster attempting murder, protecting his financial reputation was secondary. "Liam," Elias said, placing his phone on the table. "Prepare Julian Vance to testify against Clara in exchange for full immunity. And tell David to secure that search warrant. Once the evidence is retrieved, issue a formal arrest warrant for Clara Thorne in New York." The race against time was on, but Elias was now ensuring not only Eleanor's life but also his wife's ultimate confrontation with justice. The team in New York, led by David Chen, moved with surgical precision. Armed with the court-approved search warrant for the specific safe deposit box, they arrived at the bank downtown. The box was accessed and its contents, a few family trinkets and a tightly folded, certified document, were retrieved. David Chen called Elias in Geneva immediately, his voice betraying a rare intensity. "We have it, Elias. The original life insurance policy change form," David confirmed. "It's dated 3 years ago, signed by Clara and witnessed by a notary she used for personal work. It clearly names Clara Thorne and Julian Vance as the sole beneficiaries of Eleanor Thorne's $3 million policy, diverting the funds from the original family trust. The evidence was undeniable. The financial motive for the systematic neglect and abuse was proven. The official charge was immediately upgraded from fraud and elder abuse to attempted murder. The arrest was executed swiftly and discreetly at Clara's luxury hotel. She was booked under a temporary charge related to her financial crimes, though the underlying reason, attempted murder, loomed silently. Clara, stripped of her freedom and her facade, was transported to a holding facility. Her initial call was not to her lawyer, but, surprisingly, back to Elias, an authorized, monitored conversation arranged through the police to facilitate communication about joint assets. "You really did it, you self-righteous bastard," Clara's voice crackled through the phone, thick with hate. "You chose a half-senile old woman over your entire life, over your reputation." Elias was back in his penthouse, watching the city lights, the symbol of the empire he was risking. "You chose $3 million over your mother's life, Clara. There is no reputation worth covering that up." "Oh, but there is," she retorted, a dark edge returning to her voice. "You think you're so clean, Elias? Do you think those overseas land deals were all ethical? Do you think I don't know who you made disappear from your books during the Meridia acquisition 5 years ago? I was your trophy wife, yes, but I was also your confidant." She paused, letting the implication hang. "If I go down for 10 years, I guarantee you, Elias, the SEC and the IRS will be looking right behind me. I kept detailed records of every shady corner you cut. I kept them safe. Think about your empire, Elias. Think about Meridia." The line went dead. Elias stood motionless. He knew the Meridia acquisition was legally sound, but ethically, it was fraught with aggressive, gray area dealings that skirted regulations. Clara had been privy to the internal memos and the private discussions. The skeleton in the closet. David Chen arrived at the penthouse an hour later. They had retrieved the policy, but Clara's threat had injected a paralyzing fear into the legal strategy. "She's bluffing, but she's not wrong," David admitted, reviewing Clara's threat and the history of the Meridia deal. "The deal itself was clean, but we used aggressive offshore shell structures to minimize tax exposure and secure certain approvals quickly. If Clara has the internal communication records, the emails, the ledger notes, it could trigger a massive, multi-year federal investigation into tax fraud and market manipulation. It won't land you in prison, but it will bankrupt you with legal fees and fines, and destroy your reputation entirely." Elias looked at the city, no longer seeing opportunity, but vulnerability. Clara had spent years meticulously gathering evidence of his ruthlessness, not out of malice, but as her own secret insurance policy. "So, the woman who tried to murder her own mother is now holding my career hostage," Elias summarized, his voice weary. "What is our move, David? We need to find those records before she releases them, or before her lawyer uses them to negotiate a lesser charge." "We need leverage," David said, pointing to the surveillance report from Geneva. "Julian Vance is our only loose end. He knows things. He might know where she hid her blackmail file." Elias flew back to Geneva immediately. He needed to apply pressure personally. Julian Vance, now detained under house arrest in a secure location pending his cooperation agreement, was their only direct link to Clara's operational secrets. Elias and Liam O'Connell met Vance in a bare, sterile conference room. Vance looked significantly worse than he had days ago. The glamour was completely gone, replaced by the grim pallor of a failed criminal. "You're facing money laundering charges in 2 countries, Julian," Elias began, placing a thick file on the table that detailed Vance's frozen assets. "Your partnership with Clara is over. Your immunity agreement is entirely conditional. We know she kept a separate set of financial and internal corporate records, a blackmail file, regarding my company's aggressive maneuvers, specifically the Meridia acquisition. I need that file. Now." Vance slumped in his chair. "I told you everything I knew about the money, Elias. The bearer bonds, the phantom art sale. But Clara never trusted anyone completely. She would only talk about the insurance. Not the life insurance, but her personal insurance." "Where is it?" Liam pressed, his voice sharp. "I don't know the exact location," Vance insisted, throwing his hands up. "It's not in a bank. It's digital," she said. "Hidden in plain sight." She was always paranoid about physical records being seized. She referred to it only as the attic. Elias leaned in, his eyes narrowed. "The attic? A cloud server? A hidden partition?" "A service," Vance whispered, suddenly eager to cooperate fully to save himself. "She used a high-end, bespoke digital storage service based in Iceland. It's marketed as completely private, fully encrypted, and beyond the reach of standard corporate or government surveillance. She paid for it in Bitcoin, through a complicated mixer, and accessed it only when she traveled." Vance pulled a handwritten note from his pocket, a desperate safety measure he'd kept hidden. "She made me memorize this, just in case she couldn't access it. It's the key to the service. Not the password, but the trigger phrase and the name of the account." Elias took the note. It was a sequence of seemingly random words, followed by a specific, personal date: Ophian's gaze, winter's woe. 05-02-2016. "Ophian is a Greek titan," Elias murmured. "Winter's woe is a reference to a specific event in our early marriage. She's using highly personal, non-digital cues." Liam immediately mobilized his digital forensics team. "Icelandic servers mean we can't just use a simple warrant. We need to compromise the server or find the digital key she used to log in. This is going to be slow." The unspoken trade Vance, seeing Elias preoccupied with the note, pushed his luck. Elias, I've given you the motive for murder, the location of the assets, and the key to her blackmail file. This is my part. I need a concrete guarantee. I want a deal that ensures I walk free, fully indemnified. Elias looked at Vance with cold contempt. You helped her plan to profit from a woman's death, Julian. You don't walk free. You testify against Clara, you get immunity from U.S. charges. But you will still be prosecuted for money laundering in Switzerland. However, Elias added. A cruel glint in his eye, I will ensure your trial is expedient, and I will not contest your eventual plea bargain. You will spend a year in a comfortable, minimum security Swiss prison. It's a price you pay for betrayal, but it's better than federal prison in the States. Vance swallowed hard, realizing this was the best offer he would get. He nodded assent. There's one more thing about the attic. She accessed it using an old, encrypted iPad she kept in a secondary safe. Not the main safe, but the hidden one in the library. Elias knew the library safe, a decoy safe behind a rolling bookshelf, which he had never bothered to open, thinking it contained only outdated financial papers. Liam, get the New York team back to the penthouse. Target the hidden safe in the library. Retrieve the iPad. We need that device to decrypt the attic without triggering alarms on the Icelandic server. The race had shifted from international law to digital forensics. Elias had secured the evidence for Clara's arrest, but his own fate now rested on retrieving a single digital file from a hidden device before Clara's desperate threat could be executed. Elias returned to New York, the tense silence of the penthouse echoing his apprehension. Eleanor was thriving under Sarah's care, a fragile but steady sign of hope. Yet, the ghost of Clara's final threat, the Meridia blackmail file, hung heavy in the air. David Chen and Liam's forensic specialist, a young, brilliant technologist named Zara, were waiting in the library, standing before the large, ornate rolling bookshelf. The safe is behind this, Elias, David confirmed. It's a redundant measure, no one ever checks the redundancy. Elias, using the combination he vaguely remembered from years ago, unlocked the small, heavy door hidden behind the books. Inside, there was no treasure, only a few dusty, antiquated documents and, tucked into the corner, a heavily customized, older model iPad encased in a shockproof shell. The device, Elias stated, pulling it out. Zara immediately took the iPad. The good news is that this is the physical key Vance mentioned. The bad news is that it's triple encrypted with two-factor authentication and a biometric lock. The moment we try to break the encryption, it could activate a self-destruct protocol designed to wipe the device and the cloud content, fulfilling Clara's threat automatically. Elias paced the length of the room. We can't wait for Clara's trial. She could release the file at any moment. We need that file to neutralize her leverage before her lawyer can use it to bargain down the attempted murder charge. Accessing the attic, Zara connected the iPad to a specialized forensics rig, designed to bypass its connection to the internet. The device uses an old, customized OS. I need to find the specific digital certificate, the key that authorizes access to the Icelandic server, the attic, without alerting the system. For the next 4 hours, the silence in the library was broken only by the rhythmic clicking of Zara's keyboard and the low, tense voices of David and Liam discussing legal countermeasures should Clara act first. Finally, Zara's voice cut through the tension. I found the digital handshake. I can now clone the authorization key onto a secure external drive. We can use this clone to access the attic as if we are Clara, without using the physical iPad, and without triggering the self-destruct. Using the cloned key and the trigger phrase provided by Vance, Zara connected to the high-security Icelandic server. The server instantly recognized the key and the phrase, Ophians gaze, winter's woe. 05-02-2016, the virtual door opened. The main folder was labeled, simply, Meridia. Elias watched on the large screen as Zara rapidly downloaded the contents. It wasn't one file, it was dozens, internal email chains, private ledger entries, voice notes, and documented communication logs detailing every gray area decision Elias had made to successfully execute the high-profile Meridia acquisition 5 years prior. "It's all here," David Chen whispered, his face pale. Every aggressive tax maneuver, every ethically questionable shortcut taken to meet the SEC deadline. She didn't miss a thing. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The files wouldn't send him to prison, but they were a nuclear deterrent. If released, they would trigger a cascade of lawsuits, federal probes, and a public scandal that would obliterate his career and reputation, making the cost of the divorce settlement insignificant by comparison. "Download everything," Elias commanded. Then, use the administrative functions to delete the entire Meridia folder from the cloud server. Permanently. Wipe the trace from the iPad as well. "I want this file to cease existing." Zara executed the commands, and the screen flashed with a final confirmation: deletion complete. Server access terminated. Elias finally let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had neutralized the blackmail, securing his empire and clearing the way to prosecute Clara fully. He had won the legal battle, but the victory felt hollow. He had learned he was married to a potential murderer, and that he himself had compromised his ethics enough to create the very weapon used against him. The phone rang. It was David Chen's office. "Clara's lawyer is demanding an immediate settlement meeting. They are ready to discuss terms. Tell them I have retrieved the personal insurance policy and destroyed the file," Elias said, his voice hard. "Tell them their leverage is gone. The only terms we will discuss are the terms of her plea bargain for attempted murder." Clara Thorne, sitting in the cold, sterile room of her temporary attorney's office, listened to the summary of events with mounting dread. Her insurance, the digital file detailing Elias's tax evasion and regulatory shortcuts, was gone. Her lover, Julian Vance, was cooperating with the prosecution in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her final, devastating weapon had vanished in a cloud of Icelandic server data. Her attorney, a seasoned but weary legal mind, leaned forward. "Clara, Elias is not offering a settlement. He is offering a plea bargain. The evidence, the life insurance policy change, the cash withdrawals from your mother's account, and the sworn medical testimony of chronic neglect, is airtight. The attempted murder charge will stick." Clara's veneer finally cracked. "He can't. It was natural causes, sped up a little. They can't prove intent. The policy change is the intent, Clara. It gave you a $3 million motive to stop her medication. Elias is ruthless. He has neutralized your ability to retaliate. You face a minimum of 10 years in a federal prison." The lawyer laid out the only viable path: a plea agreement. Clara would plead guilty to aggravated elder abuse and felony financial fraud, for the phantom art sale and the theft from Eleanor's administered account. In exchange, the state would drop the attempted murder charge, largely to spare Eleanor the trauma of testifying, but Clara would still serve a significant, guaranteed sentence, 7 years, with no possibility of early parole. She would also forfeit all claims to the marital estate beyond a very small, non-negotiable lump sum, a fraction of what she had hoped to gain. Clara signed the papers, her hand shaking. She had risked everything for a life of boundless luxury and ended up forfeiting everything for a prison sentence. Her empire of lies had collapsed entirely. Elias never attended the pre-trial hearings, choosing instead to focus on the cleanup of his own life and business. He delegated the final details to David Chen, knowing the truth about Clara's actions was punishment enough. The day of Clara's sentencing was quiet. Eleanor, supported by Sarah, attended. She was visibly stronger, healthier, and free from the constant fear that had shadowed her life. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Eleanor was invited to give a victim impact statement. She walked slowly to the stand, her gaze meeting her daughter's across the courtroom. "I loved my daughter," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite its tremor. "When she brought me into her home, I thought it was a kindness. I realize now it was a cage. The silence was the worst part. Being thirsty, being hungry, being told you are a nuisance for needing to live. But the most painful thing was not the cruelty itself, but the knowledge that she saw me only as an obstacle to be removed, a financial burden whose expiration date she tried to hasten. Elira stopped, her eyes filling with tears, not of pain, but of profound sadness. I forgive her for the thirst, for the neglect, for the years of terror. But I pity her more. Because she will never know what it means to be truly free of greed. And now, she will be locked away, perhaps finally safe from her own heart. Clara stared straight ahead, rigid and unmoving, but a single, hot tear finally escaped and tracked down her cheek. It was unclear whether it was a tear of shame or simply self-pity for her loss of freedom. The judge delivered the sentence, 7 years in federal prison. In the months that followed, Elias Thorne faced his own reckoning. Clara's threat, though neutralized, had exposed the rot in his foundation. The Meridia files were gone, but the ethical breach remained. Elias dissolved the aggressive offshore shell corporations David Chen had helped him create. He restructured his entire business, choosing transparency over hyper-aggressive profit margins. He sold the penthouse, the mausoleum of his failed marriage, and moved into a smaller, but meticulously designed home that he testified against Julian Vance in the Swiss courts, ensuring Vance received his agreed-upon minimal sentence. A necessary evil to ensure Clara's full prosecution, the cost to Elias was immense, millions in legal fees, the dissolution of a powerful but tainted business structure, and the complete destruction of his perception of love and trust. He emerged from the storm richer in wealth, but profoundly poorer in spirit. 1 year later, Elias sat on a terrace overlooking Central Park, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. Eleanor was living nearby, in a beautiful, professionally staffed residence, visited daily by Sarah, who had become Eleanor's trusted companion and friend. Elias was alone, but he was no longer blind. David Chen called. "It's over, Elias. The final documents are filed. The divorce is final. Clara's assets have been fully seized and allocated." "And the Meridia whispers?" Elias asked. "Dead. Buried with the files. You walked away clean, Elias. Cleaner than you came in." Elias looked at the skyline, a testament to the power he still commanded. He had frozen when he first saw the cruelty in his home, paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying truth of his wife. But that paralysis had given way to action, and that action had exposed a conspiracy of greed and malice. He had saved Eleanor's life and his own financial empire, but the victory was a scar, a permanent reminder of the high price of blindness that he had learned. The hardest lesson of all: trust is a luxury that must be earned, and sometimes, the monsters you fear most are the ones you let sleep in your own bed. The story of Elias Thorne became a cautionary tale whispered in the high-stakes world of Manhattan finance. Beware the secrets kept behind closed doors, for they are the ones that can truly ruin you.